The waitress slid a folded scrap of paper across the linen and under my hand, and when I opened it, my eyes went cold. Call 911. I still see that little rectangle of paper as if it were glass, thin, transparent with the heat of someone else's fear on it. We were at table 7, under the crystal chandeliers of the Seraphine, the ocean like a black mirror beyond the windows, my daughter's laughter tinkling like broken silver at the far end of the table. It was 8:15 p.m. on April 3, 2025. 2 days before the gala, my daughter had insisted we all attend in her name. I had come because I always came. Because a promise, spoken between my hands and a mason jar of coins years ago, had kept me traveling to any sill where they fed me a plate. I had come with my chipped mug folded in my bag and the old pearls that belonged to my mother, wrapped in an oilcloth like a secret. I had come believing family meant sheltering hands, not folded notes. Do you know the feeling when your own dining chair becomes a foreign island? When the silverware on the table shines with a light that does not reach you? That is what I felt that night. An island all my own, and the sea between me and them was made of intentions. You must know who I am if you are to feel the betrayal. My name is Miriam. I have raised children with hands cracked by flour and late-night worry. I have walked miles with babies on my hip while my husband followed dreams that did not pay the rent. My life is marked by small things. A mason jar that once held 6 months' worth of coins for a cataract operation that never happened. A chipped mug with a blue flower that I have used since my daughter was a child. And a pair of pearls that my grandmother pinched between her teeth like days of dignity. I have lived in a modest 2-room house where the kettle sings at noon, and where letters arrive folded with the heavy honesty of postmarks. My ordinary world smelled of cumin and sunlight, of soap and old paper. It smelled of work and promises. My daughter Sadia, bless and damn her, lives in marble and glass now. She has a house with columns and a chandelier that could eclipse a church. Her marriage to Khalid brought her a new name on bank ledgers and a presence on invitation lists. She invited us on this cruise under the pretense of celebration. "Mother, the family must be together," she had said, her voice syrup-sweet with the manners of wealth. I believed it because she had once believed in me. She had once kissed my forehead with the map of my years etched between her fingers. I had taught her to read the moon when she was small, and I had sown her bloomers with my own hands. A mother's ledger keeps every kindness. A mason jar remembers. There were small signs before the note. The first evening, when we arrived, I had gone up to the balcony to watch the sea press its thumb against the horizon, and I saw a man in a navy suit speak to Sadia in the corridor. He had the look lawyers have when they are weighing a sentence and a price at the same time. He said something about durable power of attorney and November 12, 2024, and Sadia's laugh, which I once could have counted on, disappeared from her face like a string being cut. Later, I found a letter on my pillow, folded and anonymous, the handwriting unfamiliar. "For your convenience, the family has arranged travel and accommodations." My hands trembled. My mason jar trembled with it. Who arranges for a mother's convenience without the mother's knowing? I remember the pearls, too, how I polished them with the sleeve of my dress the night before we left. They were cool against my palm, the weight of 3 generations. I tucked them into a small leather pouch and told myself I would bring them out when Sadia stood up to speak at the gala and introduced me with the pride she had once worn like a shawl. How naive this hope felt, even before the note. We sat then, all of us. Sadia at the head, Khalid at her left like a pillar. Their children peacocks of small grins, uncles and cousins arrayed like ornaments. And I at the far side, beside a window that showed nothing but the Black Sea. The menu was printed in gold. The cutlery sang when touched. They spoke of investments and charities and the tedious joys of diplomacy. My son-in-law mentioned an adjustment in family holdings with the careless gravity of men who move money like chessmen. I tasted salt in my mouth, and it was not from the sea. The waitress, with her tray like a balancing act, came and went. Once her eyes met mine, only for a breath, and she slipped that paper toward me, as if sliding a pebble into my palm. I folded it open under my napkin, fingers clumsy from the weight of recognition, and read, Call 911. If you have ever been in a public place and found yourself holding a private alarm in your fist, you know the vertigo. Is it for me? For someone else? Is it a joke? My heart beat a foolish drum in my chest. Who calls 911 on a cruise ship at 8:15 p.m.? And why would she tell me to do it? At that second, I saw Sadia through the crystal, smiling and unaware. Who among them would call for help? I had always been taught that family speaks plainly. We say what plagues us. We bring pots, we carry wood. We argue over the radio at night about which grandchild will learn to play the oud. But that night the family spoke with the hollow, clinical words of a courtroom, and the conversation had nothing to do with me. The note made me a spy in my own life. There were other small betrayals in the following hours, more like insects than beasts, but even insects can ruin a harvest. At 10:30 p.m., I brushed past the library and saw Sadia and Khalid again, in a doorway region where the ship's evening light licked the carpeted stairs. They were going over papers, folios thick with blue ink, stamped and official. Sadia signed something with a pen that looked expensive and indifferent. I could see the heading on one document as they shuffled it back into a leather folder. Last Will and Testament. Amendment. The date printed in the corner made my mouth dry. January 15th, 2025. Another document lay open like a wound. Transfer of real property. Effective immediately. I folded back and walked away as if my feet were made of stone. But the words followed me. Effective immediately. The library clock chimed and the sound seemed ceremonial. Why did they feel ashamed of me? Why did they move papers like thieves in the dark? These were questions a mother does not ask aloud until her voice breaks. That night, lying under the ship's slow motion, I held my pearls and thought of a lifetime of small economies. I thought of the mason jar and the way coins clinked like tiny absolutions. I thought of the durable power of attorney my hands had once signed, back when sickness was shadow and I feared madness, on March 20th, 2025. A document I had signed trusting the comfort of family. Did I sign it for love or through fatigue? Did I understand the breadth of its teeth? I had always signed on the dotted line when my hand trembled with worry. The pen had been offered, the lawyer's voice calm. It was supposed to be a safeguard, to ensure my accounts were managed while I recovered from an illness I'd barely felt. I had not known then what language lawyers keep in their pockets. A week earlier, in my little kitchen, I had tucked that power of attorney away into a locked box because the world insists we lock away what we prize. The box had an old brass key. My daughter had borrowed the key just to look, she had said. She had not returned it. She sent instead a courier with a polite note. Mother, we are taking care of things for you. What things? I asked, and received no answer but the patter of a closed door. It is strange how a single gesture, the slipping of paper, the clink of coins, the signing of a pen, can redraw the map of a life. The ship hummed and the family hummed, and I felt like a moth caught in the pages of their opulence. I am not a foolish woman. I have taught children to tell the truth. But love makes us soft in places where prudence would have been stronger. Was my softness exploited? The thought turned like a coin in my palm. There were whispers, too, at the buffet the following afternoon. Two cousins spoke with a laugh that cut like a blade. Mother is charming in her way, but you know how she keeps her papers. Yes, the other said, glancing toward my chair. The assets are being consolidated. I dropped my tea because my hands betrayed me. I had given my life to this family, and now they spoke of me as if I were a ledger to be balanced. The buffet plates were suddenly cold. That evening, I found one of my old letters missing from the locked drawer beside my bed, the drawer I had believed only I could keep secrets in. I reached for a scrap where I kept a note Sadia had written when she was 7, a childish promise to always love Ami, and it was gone. The drawer lock turned with a smoothness I would later learn to hate. I tried to be pragmatic. I told myself I would speak with Sadia at breakfast, that a mother's question asked plainly will always return as the bedrock of family. But at breakfast, Sadia's smile was lateral. She stared past me as if I were a stranger on the promenade. She arranged a seating plan where I was placed beside a man I did not know, an estate planner named Mr. Farouk, whom she introduced with the civility of a woman arranging a painting she hates. "We'll discuss some paperwork in the morning, Miriam," she said, her voice crisp. "Just small details about property and trust." Her hand brushed mine, cold like a coin, and then she lifted it as if she had burned herself. Her daughter, my granddaughter Noor, was effusive and bright, smiling with that practiced affection of the young who have been trained by tutors in the art of gentleness. They all had been tutored in how to do comfort without the substance of it. For a moment, I remembered rocking a small child to sleep with my palm on her back, and I felt the memory like a bruise. I thought of calling someone. 911 had been scrawled across my palm by the waitress like a tiny lifeline. But who calls 911 when the danger is not physical but legal, when the peril is a blade wearing the robe of courtesy? I would later learn that the ship's security had been instructed by a private number to defer to family wishes, but at the time I only felt the isolation as if a fog had been poured around me. Yet the island did not hold me forever. Even while they arranged their ledgers, my memories were an undercurrent of resistance. I remembered the time I had sewn for Sadia until my fingers bled. I remembered the mason jar in the back of a closet, the one I had promised would pay for her passage if she ever chose to leave. I remembered penitent nights where I had gone without bread so she could have a lesson. These things are not erased by a signature. A signature can try to strangle a lifetime, but a lifetime is a stubborn creature. There are moments in a life when a hand slips and shows you what it hides. Mine occurred on the second night of the cruise, after the formal dinner when the music in the salon took on that false intimacy older people seek when they want to be young again. I excused myself and walked to the stern to breathe. The ocean was an old friend, and it told me nothing. On the deck, a young crewman tossed a cigarette into the gutter and a book fell at his feet, an open ledger with names and numbers. In that hurried glance, I saw a figure circled. Miriam, trusts sealed. The entry had a notation in another hand. Move to Family Trust, 04/01/2025. See amendment. My fingers found the edge of the rail, and I steadied myself as if the ship had suddenly tilted toward betrayal. The next day a storm came up, as if the weather itself had been conscripted to my unease. The ship rolled and the plates slid and the crew moved with a practiced calm that mocked the churn in my belly. That evening, when we gathered again for supper, the table seemed to have rearranged itself, the air moved by currents of money. At the sinking point of my patience, at the moment when a woman either crumples or steals herself, the waitress returned. She did not bring dessert. She brought silence and the way her face carried it. She leaned close and with a whisper I could feel like a caress, told me, "There's a safe in your old cabin. The key was left under the loose floorboard. They think you don't look." That was when I felt the first true click of being invisible. They thought I did not notice the missing key, the altered seating chart, the sudden presence of Mr. Farouk in our conversations. They thought I would not move because some people believe old women are stones, immovable and dull. If only they could hear how stones remember. I walked back to my cabin with the careful steadiness of a woman who has learned to keep her hearth intact. The floorboard creaked, and under it, like a memory waiting to be picked, was the key. It felt small and warm in my palm. The safe in my cabin had been forced. The lock hung open and inside lay envelopes and receipts, and one thick folder labeled in my cramped handwriting, "For Sadia, when she is ready." My hands shook as if the ship were already rolling with my decision. What did they mean by family trust? Who had the right to move what I feared for? I had lived long enough to know that the cruelest theft is not of money but of meaning. To be told you have been cared for while your very rights are being turned into ledgers. I gathered the envelopes and the folder and kept them like contraband against my chest. I had a mason jar, old pearls, a chipped mug, and a locked box of letters, but I also had knowledge. and knowledge is a kind of currency. I would speak to someone, I decided, but words must be honed like knives. I would not yet call out 911 into the gilded hush of my family. I would not yet become the spectacle of one who is surprised into anger. No, I would watch. That night, I placed the folder under my pillow like a talisman and slept with the ship's engines in my belly. The next morning, at breakfast, Sadia handed me a small card with a smile that would have been apology if it were sincere. "Mother," she said, "we've engaged a trust company to manage the property. It's best for everyone." She named the company Regal Trust and Estate, LLC, and recited dates and clauses as if they were poetry. I felt my name in those clauses as if it were a token in someone else's rhyme. The words consolidation and effective immediately hung between us like garlands with thorns. It was then the micro thing occurred that will live with me. My hand brushed my pearls and my fingers felt a sting as if someone had nicked them. I looked up and Sadia's face was pale and composed, like a painting on a wall that has learned to look away. I had always believed, with the silly conviction of a mother, that love was a public contract. You show up. You are present. But contracts can be reworded and signatures can be manufactured. The thought crept in, insistent and cold. What if the document I had signed, the durable power of attorney of March 20th, 2025, had been used not to protect me but to move my possessions into corridors where I could not find them? What if my name, written in a tired hand, was now being turned into the echo of a marginal note on a lawyer's page? At noon, I found myself at the promenade, the sun a strip of brass, and I watched the children play in the pool like small islands ignorant of tides. I took the mason jar from my bag and felt the coins like the past pressing against my palm. There is a peculiar courage that gathers when you think of the small things you have saved. The jar was small, but it was also stubborn. I put a coin back into it, and the sound was an oath. They thought me placid. They thought I would not react. They thought I could be written like an annotation to their ledger. They were wrong. Dumas once wrote that vengeance is a law everyone thinks they own, but only a few can pay for. Perhaps I'm not the avenging kind, but I am the kind who remembers every kindness and every slight. I am Mariam, and I will not let the ledger write me out quietly. Soon, I would learn the difference between being forgotten and being erased. The note, call 911. They thought the ship would lull me into silence. I thought otherwise. The days after that folded note were a slow tightening of a rope. I watched them move in patterns designed to make a woman forget she had been whole. Softened edges, polite routings, the way invitations with embossed gold slipped under my door with schedules for tea with the ladies, that conveniently conflicted with any meeting where papers might be discussed. They thought that by keeping me busy with crocheting circles and group photos, they could rearrange the house of my life behind my back. But a life is not simply a house. It is a ledger of every small kindness, every borrowed bread and mended hem. The ledger remembers. I had read enough to know the shape of a plot when it is being sown. The ship's crew, those who live within the ribs of a vessel and eat its salt, are people used to watching secrets move in and out like tides. The waitress, who had given me the note, a young woman named Aisha, disappeared into the ship's staff schedules with the stealth of someone who has seen too much. Our encounter had been a pebble thrown into the water. Its ripples were now my only allies. I cannot be the only mother to notice, I told Aisha in a whisper at 10:00 p.m. in the staff corridor, where the hum was less polished than in the dining room, and where a woman can speak without the chandeliers listening. She had a cigarette tucked behind her ear like an old-fashioned pencil. Her voice was low and quick. "You think she's safe?" "She's safer when people think she's sleeping," Aisha said. "But I saw what you saw. Mr. Farouk has been to your cabin. The cameras on deck 3, no, not the public ones. There's a service corridor camera. I can't get it for you, but Omar, he's the security tech. He owes me a favor. He will pull one clip. He's small, but he has a big heart." The way she said big heart made me laugh quietly like a rusty hinge. Omar met me at 2:15 p.m. the next day in the bowels of the ship, leaning up against a panel with wires and the scent of machine oil wrapped around him. He was younger than my eldest grandson, but wore the kind of tiredness that belongs to those who have watched more than their share. I showed him the folded folder, the envelopes, the letterheads, the handwriting I recognized and the one that did not belong. I told him about the key under the floorboard and the safe that lay open. His fingers danced over the keyboard like a pianist's. "Security is strict," he warned. "We respect privacy. But if something illegal happened on board, fraud, forgery, that's different. We can pull clips, but you'll need to file an official complaint with the ship's purser or the captain. They don't like being involved in family matters." He glanced at me, then at the mason jar tucked into my bag. "You'll need proof." Proof. The word had the taste of iron. I had a folder of papers, a cracked signature, and the memory of a pen sliding across a page. I had also started to collect whispers, snatches of conversation held in the air like silverfish. Once, in the corridor at 11:30 a.m., I heard Khalid on the phone. "Move the trust today. We'll tell her it's for her good. She'll never know. We'll rearrange titles, residential property, investment accounts. About $230,000 in liquid assets now to be placed under Consolidated Family Trust. April 1st, 2025 is the effective date. Make it neat." He laughed then, a sound like coins dropping into a jar that had no bottom. I pressed my ear to the cracked wood until my hearing burned. I learned 2 of the amendment to the last will and testament, dated January 15th, 2025, that had been signed in a lawyer's office with the kind of practiced solemnity reserved for those who hide things behind phrases. The amendment removed me from primary beneficiary in certain holdings, replacing my name with a phrase, "Family Trust for the benefit of the children." It read elegantly. It read like someone had written a new ending for the story of my life. When I compared the signatures, the loops of my M were flattened, the crescents in my R sharper than my hand ever made them. I have been writing the same letters since I learned to hold a reed pen. Signatures are as much muscle as memory. They are the footprints of a hand. I needed more. Words on paper can be doctored. One can forge a name. One can hire a notary who will stamp anything for the right fee. I needed a moment that would not bend under scrutiny. So I watched and I waited and I went to the places they thought I would not go. Their meetings, their private corners. The ship's small rooms where smugness thinks itself safe. It was in one of those small rooms that I found the first true crack. The gala rehearsal had sent them all to the salon at 4 p.m. I took that hour and walked to the administrative floor where the ship's itineraries were posted and where lawyers like to sign such arrangements because the chandeliers are less watchful there. There, in a dustless cabinet, was a file stamped with the crest of Regal Trust and Estate, LC, and the words, "Amendment to Trust Agreement, Mariam Ahmed, 04/01/2025. My heart did a curious thing. It did not slow. It sharpened. The folder contained a duplicate of the durable power of attorney I had signed on March 20th, 2025, but with an addendum that read, "Effective immediately. Assets to be consolidated under Consolidated Family Trust. Trustee, Khalid Ahmed." The notary's stamp carried the date April 1st, 2025, and a registration number I could cross-check. I made a copy. That was the first cardinal rule I have learned in my life. When you find something that can kill you, copy it. Omar showed me how to burn the file back onto a thumb drive and hand it to me like a small weapon. "This will do," he whispered. "Bring it to the captain, and don't let them stop you." He glanced toward the corridor where a suited man, Mr. Farouk, no doubt, was speaking quietly with a concierge. "But be careful," Omar added. "They'll know." Careful is a difficult thing to be when your breath is the only bell that announces your presence. I went to the purser first, because a ship's purser is the person bent to the arithmetic of passengers and complaints. At 5 p.m., I stood before his desk and showed him the thumb drive. I told him in my evenest voice that I suspected fraud. He was a plump, officious man who had been doing the job long enough to have thick skin. He took the drive and frowned. "We require an official affidavit, Mrs. Ahmed," he said, "and a report from the security office." But he also pointed me to a form. The smallest kindness, perhaps, was that he did not laugh. Forms are the beginning of the law. The law likes its steps. I filled out the affidavit with a hand that trembled somewhat less than the first time I had signed for a mortgage. I detailed dates: March 20th, 2025, April 1st, 2025, January 15th, 2025, times 10:30 p.m., 2:15 p.m., and amounts about $230,000 in liquid assets, approximately PKR $5,000 held in property valuation conversion. Legal details are a river a woman must wade into on tiptoe, and I put my feet in carefully. The purser took the completed form and handed it to the captain. The captain, who had a face like a bank ledger, no surprise and no vice, listened and closed his eyes. "We take such matters seriously," he said. "But we must act with discretion. Discretion. Always discretion when money is involved." That night, in the small hours, I did what I had sworn to do since I was old enough to tie a knot. I gathered my evidence, and I prepared. The folder under my pillow now had an addition: a small stack of copies, my own fingerprints on their edges. I recorded a voicemail to myself, speaking plainly. "This is Miriam. On April 3rd, 2025, I found evidence of a transfer of assets under my name without my full and informed consent. I witnessed Mr. Farouk and Khalid sign an amendment. I request investigation." It was clumsy, but it was mine. I tucked the thumb drive in my pocket and slept with my phone under my cheek, as if the device could protect me the way a child's hand protects a sleeping face. The micro cliffhanger comes now. Because life likes to suspend us, I had proof. They had power. I never expected what I found in the cabin safe. The days after my official statement were a war of small evasions. Sadia became attentive in a way that was designed to smooth. She suggested family therapy, an offer that smells like oil when the engine beneath it is financial. She brought me herbal teas and read me long-form essays on gratitude. When I asked her about the documents, she smiled with the practiced tightness of the well-trained. "Mother, this is for your own good. The trust is to protect you." She used the word protect in a manner that felt like a gasp behind a window. That word, protect, was the armor they took to dance on. I watched the dance and I learned the steps. I could see how they were moving people around me like pawns. The cousins who agreed to sign away rights in exchange for small promises. The lawyer who arrived each morning like a colonial bird to peck through documents. Each of their moves was a chord in a cruel symphony, and then the clinching piece arrived through a channel I had not expected. Noor, my granddaughter, came to my cabin late one evening at 11:20 p.m., her cheeks flushed as if from exertion. She fidgeted with a bracelet and looked at me like a child with a secret. "Ami," she said, and she dropped her voice as if afraid the chandeliers would upbraid her. "I think they are doing something wrong." She had found, tucked at the bottom of a drawer, a page torn from a notepad with a list of account numbers and the notation, "Move to Consolidated Trust, urgent." She had not known what the numbers meant, but she had found them and recognized that her mother's name had been circled. Noor's eyes were wide. "I don't want to be involved," she said, "but I think you should know. It is curious how the young can be the instruments of truth. They are unpolished and therefore honest in ways the polished are not." Noor's admission was a small comet in an otherwise clouded sky. I took Noor into my arms the way a grandmother takes a sparrow out of the rain. I smelled the shampoo in her hair and the breath of youth, and felt something like hope prick at the edges of my grief. She handed me the scrap. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my pocket, because evidence is always better kept dry. The next break came from the most unlikely place: a misfiled bank receipt. In the linen closet of the family suite, surely a place where affections were measured by the fold of fresh sheets, someone had left an envelope with bank slips. I opened it with fingers that trembled not from fear, but from something close to anger. And there it was. A diversion of liquid assets, the phrase again, amounting to about $230,000 transferred on March 31, 2025, to an account titled Consolidated Family Trust, trustee Khalid Ahmed. There was a stamp on the deposit slip, Regal Trust and Estate, LLC. The bank branch code matched the one on the amendment I had photographed. I set the slip beside the thumb drive and the affidavit like a still life destined for testimony. But a truth, even when assembled of tiny facts, must be presented before a tribunal that listens. The captain had been earnest, but bureaucracy moves slow as seaweed. I began to consider another path. Evidence can also be a story a woman tells in public. The ship would have press, celebrity guests who loved a scandal, and the gala 2 days hence would be a plateau bristling with cameras. Dumas teaches that justice is a blade you must choose the angle of. A poor swing may break you more than it breaks the foe. I had learned to swing so my hands would not betray my aim. There were small allies. Omar, the tech, handed me a slip with an access code to the security office and whispered, "If you go now, there'll be fewer around." Aisha offered to be with me when I entered. Noor would come if I wanted her to. The captain had assured me that any complaint filed would be recorded and acted upon. The law was a slow horse. The ship, a faster carriage. Which would win the race depended on timing. And then, 3 nights before the gala, something happened that made the world tilt. I found proof of forgery. It was not just a mismatch in the loop of an M or the slant of an R. It was the smell of fresh ink on old paper and the evidence of an indent that only a heavy hand could make. In a drawer, I found a paper labeled Witness Roster. On it, in a hurry, someone had written the name of a notary. S. Karim, Notary Public Reggie, number 5582, and the signature that certified the amendment. I had a small card from a neighbor in my village saved among my letters. The handwriting on that card, written when Sadia was 12 and we had celebrated a small victory, was the same hand that my daughter had used in an earlier note. I compared the signature on the notary stamp with a copy of a document from 2010, where Sadia had signed her name with a gentleness and a loop that matched nothing on the amendment. Forensics is not only for laboratories. It is the art of noticing. I took the thumb drive to Omar and begged him to help me extract the security footage. He pulled a clip from April 2nd at 10:30 p.m. The video was grainy but clear enough. A man in a dark suit, Mr. Farouk, entered my cabin with a key, left within 10 minutes, and just after him, Sadia herself came in and sat on the bed. The camera caught the small motion of a folder being exchanged. The footage stopped when the camera swiveled away. Someone had interfered, but it was enough. It was enough to see the handoff, the look on the faces, the way Sadia's mouth moved as if rehearsing a lie. Omar burned the clip onto a second drive and handed it to me like an offering. Forged documents, transfer slips, night visits to my cabin. Each piece made the tapestry of a conspiracy. I felt something crystalline in my chest, the moment when endurance becomes action. The world was no longer merely passing by me. It was an actor I could name in court or in public. Midway through this fevered watchfulness, Dumas' shadow leaned over me. The world, he would say, is not only full of wrongs, but full of those who profit from wrongs by persuading us that the wrong was mercy. I thought his words in my bones. To forgive is noble. To forget is dangerous. To act is the only way to keep the poor from being erased. I felt the moral weight of the moment like a cloak. Mercy misapplied is a false coin, I told myself. A mother's kindness cannot be cashed twice. These were not merely my thoughts. They became my policy. The climax approached like a storm front. On the morning of April 3rd, 2 days before the gala, the date already significant in their papers, I decided to take my evidence to the captain in person and demand immediate action. The captain's office, however, had its own complications. Before I reached him, I overheard a conversation in the corridor at 9:40 a.m. Sadia on the phone, voice clipped, saying, "We need to make sure Mother does not go to the captain. If she does, call the physician in her name. Say she's disoriented? Say anything. I can't have agents probing our family." She laughed softly then, and the laugh was like a hand smoothing a tablecloth to hide a spill. That call was the burning coal that made the rest of the day impossible. The decision had to be made. Go to the captain with the evidence and risk them using the physician as a pretext, or go public at the gala and force a scandal that would drag the truth into light. Both choices were dangerous, but the nature of danger had shifted. What was at stake was no longer comfort, but the possibility of being erased entirely. I could imagine waking one morning to find my name missing from every ledger, my letters gone, my little house annexed and consolidated, and my coins melted into a vault I could not reach. So I planned. I would go to the captain at 2:00 p.m. with the thumb drive and the affidavit, and insist on an immediate review of the security footage. If the captain refused, I would go to the ship's press and tell them, and then call the authorities when we docked. The seas can be a courthouse if people insist. I made my list: evidence, witnesses, the names and dates. March 20th, 2025. March 31st, 2025. April 1st, 2025. And I rehearsed my voice until it sounded steady. Before I left my cabin, I did one last thing. I opened the folder with the amendment one more time and compared my signature with the one on the durable power of attorney I had signed on. March 20th, 2025. The forger had tried to replicate the shaky hand of an older woman, stroke after stroke, but there were differences a child could see. The 2 had a curl at the top in the forged script. My 2 is a straight spear. The forgery trembled in places where my hand was steady. The law will listen to these differences if someone with a trained eye shows them. I pressed the thumb drive to my chest and stepped out into the bright corridor. The ship felt suddenly smaller, the chandeliers oppressive as eyes. I saw their faces in the glass, smiles like masks. I tasted iron in my mouth, a soldier's taste. Then, on the threshold of the captain's office, something else happened that no plot had prepared me for. The purified glass door swung open, and Sadia stood within, her face a mask of composure. Her hand rested on a folder. She looked at me and then at the captain and said, with the smoothness of a practiced actor, "Captain, I believe my mother has been making unfounded allegations. I request a medical evaluation of her capacity to make such claims." The captain's lips went thin. He glanced at me and then at the folder in her hands. Inside, visible even from across the room, was a single sheet, a physician's note dated April 2nd, 2025, signed by Dr. Laghari, stating concern about my short-term memory and disorientation, recommending temporary guardianship. The room thinned out as if someone had drawn a curtain. Dr. Laghari's note held the power to reframe everything. If the captain accepted it, my complaint could be dismissed as the ramblings of an incapacitated elder. All the forms, the clips, the slips, relegated to the margins. I felt my knees become less reliable. A lifetime of holding plates steadied me in other ways. I did not fall. I stepped forward and lifted the thumb drive from my pocket, and the captain held his hand out. In that instant, the world reduced to a single motion. To tell the truth, to reveal the theft in the face of a preemptive diagnosis meant to strip my authority. I raised my voice, a small thing, but one honed by decades of calling children home from tears. "Captain," I said, and my throat felt like a bell. "If you will not review the camera footage and the documents right now, then I will make my complaint public at the gala tonight. I will have the press here. I will not be silenced by a note signed yesterday." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Ahmed," he said, "we must follow procedure. But we also must protect passengers. If the doctor says there is concern, we have a duty—" He was interrupted as the door behind him opened and Mr. Farouk stepped in, his smile judicial. He said something like, "Perhaps a mediated approach." And then the captain looked at the documents in Sadia's folder, and his face, which had been ledger-like, now took on the expression of a man balancing a scale. Sadia turned to me then with a tenderness that looked as if it had been practiced in mirrors. "Mother," she said, "please, think of the family." At that moment, everything was at stake. A diagnosis could rewrite witness statements. A single signed note from a physician could be the mainsail that carries a ship of lies away from sight. I understood finally why they had wanted secrecy. A public spectacle dissolves forged signatures into gossip. A private diagnosis with the right notary can make it law. I had to act. But how do you act when the law places a doctor's pen above your sight? The climax arrived with the ordinary acoustics of the captain's office, the soft click of the clock at 2:03 p.m. I had to choose the exact angle of my fight, public scandal or private procedure. Both were dangerous. I could hear Aisha and Omar in the corridor, waiting like witnesses behind a curtain. I had the thumb drive and the affidavit. I had the video. I had the bank slip. I had Noor and the scrap of paper. I had Omar's help. I had a cup of courage brewed from indignation and memory. I stepped forward, my hand on the captain's desk, and I pressed play on the clip that would change everything. I pressed play, and the screen remained black. The screen stayed black as if someone had drawn a curtain over the truth itself. The captain's office, with its bank-like silence, seemed suddenly to be the belly of a beast. And in that belly I stood with a thumb drive, feeling like a small and useless stone. Mr. Farouk smiled with the confidence of a man who believes laws are ornaments to be arranged at will. "Technical difficulties," he said to the captain, with a calm that would have been charming in any other room in the world. "Perhaps the drive is corrupted." He looked at me as one looks at a stray dog to be shooed away. Noor's small hand found mine then, warm and steady, and I felt the weight of her confidence settle into my bones. Omar, who had watched every keystroke like a hawk, leaned close to the console and hissed, "They've jammed the feed. Someone cut the live relay. It's deliberate." He had the stubbornness of the young who have nothing to lose but the truth. "But I mirrored a copy to the cloud at 1:58 p.m., he whispered, and the word cloud was a small jewel in his mouth. "If I can get a connection, we can stream it." Sadia's face was the exact color of porcelain, that dangerous whiteness that pretends it harbors no heat. She moved as if rehearsed for an absolution. Dr. Ligari, with his clean coat and faintly officious manner, folded his hands and looked at me with an expression that suggested pity or calculation. I could never be sure which. The captain, a man who had listened to storms and complaints in equal measure, frowned. "Mrs. Ahmed," he said, "this is a serious allegation. If there has been tampering, we must confer with the ship's security and, if necessary, the authorities at our next port of call. We cannot detain passengers without cause." "You can play the clip," I said, and my voice surprised me by sounding steady. "Play what you have. Play anything. If you cannot, then allow me to make it visible to others." My chest felt like a drum tuned to an anxious note. He hesitated, thinking of the balance between procedure and scandal. Farouk placed a hand on his folder as if to anchor him to the safer shore. The room held its breath and then let out a collective, small exhale. I turned toward the captain and said words I had not known I had practiced. "Captain, if you let a private diagnosis be used as a shield to conceal a crime, then you will be complicit in the erasure of a life. I ask for two things. Review the footage from the corridor on April 2nd at 10:30 p.m., and, if you cannot access it here, allow me to take the evidence public at tonight's gala. I will not be hidden by a doctor's pen." Silence sat on the furniture like a guest who refuses to leave. The captain's eyes softened, and at last he said, "Very well. We will review the footage. But I must also protect all parties." He tapped at the console, and Mr. Farouk fumbled something back. For a breath, there was a whisper of possibility. Then, as if the ship itself were tired of the suspense, an announcement crackled. The gala would be delayed by 1 hour due to technical difficulties. The chandeliers in the salon would remain lit, and gossip would have more time to dress itself. I had to move fast. Omar whispered that the ship had a satellite uplink. It was expensive and controlled, but he could, if he had a moment and if the captain permitted, push the clip to a global server. If that happened, the world outside, with its appetite for scandal, would become an unplanned witness to our family's secrets. Noor and I walked out of the captain's office into a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The gossip of the ship swelled like surf. Passengers lined the rails. Servants and crew walked with the soft, purposeful gait of those who keep a craft afloat in more ways than one. I clutched the thumb drive as if it were a rosary. We needed more than a screen. We needed a chorus. The gala that evening had drawn a certain crowd. Socialites. A few journalists who travel the world looking for thin things to thicken into headlines, and a good many people who like to see the rich perform their rituals. Among them, as luck or providence would have it, sat a woman named Layla Hassan, a sharp-featured journalist I had once seen reporting on affairs with a voice like a blade. I had recognized her from a paper she had written on estate fraud in high society. She was here, perhaps by coincidence, talking to a man with a press badge and a camera. Fate had a sense of theatricality I can only describe as delicious. I asked the captain for permission to have the clip streamed to Ms. Hassan. He granted it. After a moment of deliberation that was a little like watching an old clock decide whether to strike, Omar sat in a dim room with a satellite terminal, fingers fast as a prayer. I stood in the salon that night, beneath glass that glittered like a trial, feeling my pulse in the place where a mother's vows take root. I had prepared my words, not for court but for a congregation. The truth is often best when told plainly to many. I had copies of the bank slip, the transfer of March 31st, 2025, amount about $230,000. The amendment dated April 1st, 2025, naming Khalid Ahmed as trustee. I had the durable power of attorney originally signed by me on March 20th, 2025, and the forged amendment. I had Noor's scrap with the circled account numbers. I had the voice memos and the affidavit filed with the purser. The salon filled like a court warms to a case. People murmured in their gowns and jeweled suits. The music, a waltz that has been played to ease awkwardness at too many functions, stuttered and then stopped as Layla rose with a press badge in hand and said, "We have been asked to look at evidence of a possible crime. If this is true, it implicates forgery and fraudulent transfer of assets aboard the MV Seraphine." Sadia, seated like a queen under the chandelier, smiled with the brittle composure of the accustomed. Khalid put his hand on her knee as if to anchor her in place. The captain sat close to the entrance, his face a map of decisions. Omar connected the feed. For a breathless minute, the screen was a hesitant thing, a small black window, and then, like a curtain pulled back, the footage started to play. Grainy images filled the screen. The corridor, the door to my cabin. Mr. Farouk entering with a key at 10:30 p.m. on April 2nd. Me, my back to the camera, entertaining my own thoughts at another time. Then Sadia entering, sitting on the bed, a folder exchanged, hands that did not tremble. The video did not show a forced signature, but it showed the pattern. A friendly exchange, a secretive handover. The look of two people who believe they are arranging fate. The salon held its breath, and then it held my eyes. The air tasted like something metallic, like the mouthfeel of a secret unspooling. People began to talk, and the sound rose to a hum. Layla stood and walked to the center with a reporter's authority. "We will ensure this is investigated," she declared, and the way she said the words made me think of a judge rapping a gavel. "We will publish this feed alongside documentation. We will contact the bank and the relevant authorities." That was the sound of danger for the wrongdoers. Before the first page of the evidence could be cuffed in ink and photographed, Mr. Farouk rose like a man who had rehearsed the next act. "This is outrageous," he said. "These are taken out of context. Mrs. Ahmed has been producing documents and making allegations that are harmful. I ask that we be given time to respond." He smiled that smile of the well-drilled, Sadia's voice, which I had once known as a lullaby, was now cold as a ledger. "Mother," she said toward me in that high salon, "I have been trying to protect you from worrying. There are matters of estate planning that you do not need to understand. Let us handle them with care." A murmur swept the room. You could hear ledger pages turning in people's minds. The human need to pick a side, to align with safety or with upheaval. The captain, who had more prudence than ardor, said, "We will detain this matter for the authorities when we reach port, but I cannot make accusations here." Dumas taught that the world is a stage where masks fall in the light. I thought of him then, and felt an elevated hush like an aside. Those who weave falsehoods into family cloth forget that time and water reveal seams. I said the words to myself as if they were an oath. Before the authorities could be called and before lawyers could put on gloves, a tiny, precise thing happened that changed the course of the night. Noor, my brave Noor, rose and walked to the dais, and with the confident boldness of youth she said, "My grandmother's documents are her truth." I found numbers. I didn't know what they meant at first. But I will not watch a story be reworded into a kindness while the truth is taken. She read the scrap, and the room fell still. The young have a way of removing varnish. Then, as if the heavens themselves wished to be entertained, the door swung open, and a pair of men in plain clothes, uniformed officers from the Port Authority who had been waiting near the gangway in anticipation of the ship's docking, entered. They had been contacted by a journalist who had recognized the significance of the feed and alerted the local authorities ahead of our arrival. Layla's phone had been quicker than any corporate legal team. The officers asked to see the evidence. The captain made a reluctant nod, and the officers stepped forward with the kind of procedural thoroughness that is the skeleton of justice. They looked at the transfer slips, the thumb drive, the footage. One of them, a stern woman with hair like a storm cloud, said, "These documents suggest possible forgery and unlawful transfer of assets. We will need to take statements. We will also place a temporary hold on any contested accounts until forensics can confirm authenticity." Sadia's face, which had been the calm of someone who pays others to make threats disappear, grew pale in a way pale cannot be if it is not guilt. Khalid clenched his jaw as if grasping for air. Mr. Farouk, who had been comfortable in counsel's robe, found the fabric suddenly too heavy. They were taken, not in chains or dramatics, but with the precise efficiency of men and women who prefer paper to melodrama. The officers led them gently toward the gangway, and the ship's salon watched like an audience at a tragedy. Once the officers had left the room, once the first act of public censure had been set into motion, the captain turned to me with a softness that had been absent in our earlier interaction. "Mrs. Ahmed," he said, "I am sorry this has been done to you. We will ensure full cooperation with the authorities on dock." The faintest note of apology lifted something inside me like a small rope. I did not scream or collapse or triumph. Instead, I sat back and felt the slow uncoiling of a muscle long held taut. The mason jar in my bag ticked like a metronome of memory. The pearls at my throat felt like ballast, but the story had another turn yet. For justice has rooms where it moves in obvious ways, and other rooms where it moves with a subtlety like tide chasing the moon. The bank that held the transferred funds, in a branch affiliated with Regal Trust and Estate, Al-C, received a flood of communication the next morning. The ship's captain, the local authorities, and a journalist had all alerted them to the possible fraud. The bank, bound by regulations and the risk of reputational ruin, placed a freeze on the account titled Consolidated Family Trust, Trustee Khalid Ahmed, pending forensic audit. This is the mechanical part of justice, paperwork and holds and the slow bureaucratic hand, but it is effective. Money, like a river, can be dammed. The notary S. Karim, whose seal had looked so official on April 1, 2025, found himself under a microscope. Forensic handwriting analysts, procured by the authorities, compared the signatures on the amendment with known exemplars of Sadia's handwriting and with documents from the notary's office. It was not long before anomalies emerged, inconsistent pressure patterns, ink drying times that did not align with the document's age, and a notary stamp that had been used in a different borough on another date. The forensics were clinical. They are practiced at finding the truth in lines of ink. Faced with the evidence, Mr. Farouk and Khalid attempted to weave a defense of benevolence, that the trust had been created to protect me from mismanagement, that the notation had been made in good faith. But lawyers cannot dance forever with facts. When presented with the security footage showing the late-night entry and handoff at 10:30 p.m. on April 2nd, when shown the bank transfer dated March 31, 2025, when shown the forged signatures and the doctored notary stamp, the prosecutor's office found a pattern. Charges were filed: forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elder. The legal language is dry and judicial, but in its dryness lives a blade. There was humiliation for them in court and in the court of public opinion. Articles ran with titles that unraveled the facade. Family trust or family theft? Cruise of deceit? When a daughter's smile masks a ledger. Social circles are fickle, and people who once sent invitations uninvited certain members now excised them from guest lists. The mansion with columns, once a stage for receptions, found itself colder as business associates withdrew and donors distanced. Reputation is a currency as fragile as the pearls I polished under my sleeve, and when spent on falsehood, it depreciates fast. Sadia came to me later, not with the practiced politeness that had been her wardrobe, but with something rawer, perhaps shame, perhaps a reawakened memory of a mother's hands. She stood in my modest kitchen back home. How strange that a marble house can shrink so quickly, and the two-room house I had always kept could swell with a dignity they had tried to take from me. And she wept. "Ami," she said, the word collapsing under years. I didn't know how to stop it. Khalid said he was protecting our future. I thought... Her voice broke like old pottery. I thought I was doing what a daughter must do. I remember rocking her when she was small, winding her hair around my fingers and singing songs with the names of saints and seasons. The iron in my chest softened. I could have unleashed the full weight of the law upon her. I could have demanded the harshest justice. But Dumas's gravity returned to me like a chill. Vengeance is a noble art only when it restores balance. Cruelty in the name of justice is its own sin. A moral aside rose in my voice, as if the sea itself spoke. When a child trades her mother's name for a ledger, the wound is deep, but mercy, like fire, must be used to clear, not to consume. I forgave, but not without consequence. Forgiveness for me was not a wiping of deeds. It was the settling of accounts. Sadia agreed to a mediated settlement. The amendment would be declared void. The consolidated transfers would be reversed where possible. The trustee appointment of Khalid would be annulled. A protective conservatorship would be placed only upon petition and with court oversight, not by private diagnosis. The bank unfroze accounts only after compliance with the authorities' forensic audit. Khalid faced legal penalties, fines, and a period of community service, and his professional licenses, those which had relied on good repute, were suspended pending further inquiry. He lost business partners and public trust, the kind of capital that is more binding than any forged seal. The pearls at my throat returned to their place one evening when Noor came with me to a small gathering where the authorities had made a formal apology and restoration. People I had known for years shook my hand with a new respect that had the flavor of remorse. The mason jar, which had traveled in my bag to remind me of the many small economies of my life, found a home again on my kitchen shelf. I opened it and found coins and a small note Noor had sneaked inside. For truth. I wept then. But they were the sorts of tears that clear the dust from a window and let light through. In the months that followed, the legal machinery turned. The notary faced sanctions and an inquiry into other documents he had executed. Regal Trust and Estate, LLC, was investigated for compliance failures, and the bank reviewed its procedures for account title changes. The captain's earlier reluctance was softened into a collaboration with authorities. He testified to the chain of events that led to the shipboard disclosure. Omar received commendation for his courage. The waitress Aisha was given a small bonus and a reference that might help her find steadier work. Noor chose to study law. She wanted, she said, to make sure other grandmothers would not have to climb the ladders we climbed. As for me, I did not want the mansion back as a stage for new dramas. I wanted independence. The court awarded restitution where possible. The transfers were reversed to the extent funds remained available. The house, which had been theirs in practice, became my option to reclaim, one I weighed not by size but by use. I chose instead something smaller and warmer, a modest home with a garden where I planted jasmine. There is a special contentment in planting something if you have once lived on the sea of other people's appetites. The pearls remained mine, not because of law, but because a grandmother's dignity cannot be legislated away. The moral unspools in quiet ways. The men who thought money could purchase identity found one another in a small circle of diminished friends. The social gatherings once gloved them like honors and now left behind a more honest, if narrower, company. Khalid, who had bargained with ethics, lost more than property. He lost a community that once accepted him. Sadia and I repaired our relationship in small stitches. A pot of tea, a shared memory, an apology that had weight because it was named. We both learned that restitution requires work, and that forgiveness is a labor as real as any. There are lessons I keep in my pocket like a handkerchief. Trust is a purse that must be guarded. Documents are teeth that can bite if handled by hungry hands. When the law is slow, one must use other means. Public witness, the courage of a waitress, a tech who knows the language of signals, to make the slow horse move. The world has instruments that can turn light upon darkness. Use them carefully, and use them truthfully. I will not pretend it ended without scars. Scars are honest things. They remind you that you were alive for the fight. I dreamed of simpler reconciliations, of family dinners where the laughter was not bartered for ledgers, but life is not a painting you can restore with solvents. Yet the thing I prized most, my dignity, the right to be seen by my children as a person and not as a ledger. Entry returned to me in fragments that fit in the palms of my hands. The final justice was not a grand theatrical sentence handed down by an avenging God. It was quieter. It was the public exposure that made the betrayal impractical. It was the freeze on accounts that took away the power to move assets in secret. It was friends who turned away, and a legal system that was careful enough to catch forgeries in its net. Poetic, perhaps. Dumas would have smirked at the romance in it, but practical enough to restore a life. And so, beneath the jasmine in my small garden on a morning that smelled of wet earth and cardamom, I sat with the mason jar beside me. Noor came by with a cup of tea and placed it in my hand. She will probably become a lawyer who remembers that the law is, at its best, a tool to stop bloodletting, not to cause it. If there is one truth I have learned among these tangled accounts, it is this: words written by hand can be true or false, but the witness of many makes falsehoods brittle. When the many see, the many cannot pretend ignorance. The truth, like a tide, returns to reclaim what was taken. This is no small consolation. It is the way of tides and of justice. If my story touched the small stone of courage in you, then let it go like a ripple. Tell someone who lives with uneasy relatives. Speak even softly if you suspect a wrong. Keep your mason jars and your pearls close. Record dates: March 20th, 2025, March 31st, 2025, April 1st, 2025, April 3rd, 2025, and keep receipts. They will be your allies. Keep a friend like Aisha, a stranger who will slide you a note. Keep a tech like Omar, who will mirror your voice when others try to cut the amplifiers. At the end of the day, I sit by my window and watch the sun thread gold through the jasmine leaves. There is a small, steady joy to being seen again. If you liked this story, share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe if you want more truths from an old heart that has learned to measure justice not in vengeance, but in the careful, patient work of restoration. And if you ever find a slipped note under the linen that says, "Call 911," do not ignore it. Take it like a shard of glass that can cut the right way.